Chronicles of the Grim Reaper. The Staying by Griz Calderon. Melody remembered her mother mostly in pieces, a hand resting against her cheek, the smell of the cream she rubbed into her skin, a voice calling from another room when Melody wandered too far from the house. There were photographs, of course. They filled in things memory had lost. They showed a woman standing beside a birthday cake and another sitting on a porch with a little girl in her lap. Melody studied those photographs when she was older, searching for memories she could not quite recover. But the last weeks remained clear. Her mother had been sick for a long time. Melody had been too young to understand the name of the illness or why the adults lowered their voices whenever they spoke about it. She only knew that her mother had stopped getting out of bed. At first, Melody believed this was something that would pass. People got sick. They stayed in bed. Someone brought them soup. Then they got better. Her mother did not. The bedroom changed as the weeks passed. Medicine bottles appeared on the table. Curtains stayed partly closed during the afternoon because the sunlight hurt her mother's eyes. A basin was kept near the bed. Melody learned to enter quietly. She also learned that there were things she could do. She could bring water. She could straighten the blanket when it slipped from her mother's shoulder. She could sit beside the bed and read from one of her school books, even when her mother seemed too tired to listen. Once, while reading, Melody stopped halfway through a sentence. "Do you want me to go?" Her mother's eyes opened. Her hand moved slowly across the blanket until it found Melody's. No. So Melody stayed. She did not understand why that mattered so much until many years later. There was one night when the house became very quiet. Melody woke and heard someone moving down the hallway. She climbed from the bed and followed the sound to her mother's room. A lamp burned beside the bed. Her mother was breathing differently. Melody stood in the doorway. There was someone else in the room. He stood near the window, taller than any man Melody had ever seen. A long black robe covered him, and a hood concealed his face completely. There were no eyes within it, no features, only darkness. A curved scythe rested beside him. Melody should have been frightened. She wasn't. The figure did not move toward her mother. He did not raise the scythe. He simply stood beside the bed with the patience of someone who had nowhere else he needed to be. Melody walked to her mother's side. Her small hand slipped beneath the larger one resting on the blanket. Her mother's fingers closed weakly around hers. The Grim Reaper watched them. Melody did not know his name then. She knew only that the room felt different with him in it. Her mother had spent days struggling for breath. That night, the struggle began to leave her. Her face softened. The hand holding Melody's loosened. For a moment, Melody thought her mother had fallen asleep. Then she saw something rise from the bed. Her mother stood beside it. Not the woman illness had reduced to shallow breaths and closed eyes. This was the mother Melody remembered from before. She stood straight again. Her face held no pain. She looked at her daughter. Melody could not hear her voice. She did not need to. Her mother smiled. Then the Grim Reaper turned. Her mother went with him. Melody sat beside the bed until someone found her there. For years, she wondered if she had dreamed him. By the time she was old enough to understand what had happened that night, she had stopped asking. She knew what she had seen. More importantly, she remembered what she had felt. Her mother had not been alone. Neither had Melody. When Melody told people she wanted to work with the dying, they often misunderstood her. Some thought she meant she wanted to become a doctor. Others assumed she would change her mind once she understood what hospice work involved. She did understand. That was why she chose it. She learned how illness changed a body near the end of life. She learned how to help turn someone who could no longer move without assistance, and how to moisten a mouth when swallowing became difficult. She learned that comfort could become more important than another procedure. There were medications to understand and symptoms to watch. There were families who needed someone to explain why a person was sleeping more or eating less. But much of the work could not be learned from a book. That part began when Melody pulled a chair beside a bed and sat down. Her first patient had been an old woman who apologized constantly. She apologized when Melody helped her bathe. She apologized when she spilled water. She apologized when Melody had to change the sheets. One morning, after another whispered apology, Melody stopped what she was doing. "You don't have to be sorry for needing help." The woman stared at her. Melody went back to smoothing the clean sheet beneath her. The woman began to cry. Melody sat beside her. It was then that she learned something she would carry through the rest of her career. Dying people did not always need someone to say something. Sometimes they needed someone who would not leave because they were crying. The woman told Melody about the house where she had grown up. She told her about a father who repaired shoes at the kitchen table, and a mother who sang while hanging laundry outside. She talked about a boy she had loved when she was 17. She had never married him. In fact, she had never married anyone. The boy had gone away. Life had moved forward without asking whether she was ready. "Do you think he remembered me?" the woman asked. Melody considered the question. "I think people remember more than we ever get to know." The woman smiled. After that, the stories came easily. Melody heard about jobs and neighbors. She heard about dresses that had once hung in closets and houses that no longer existed. For a few hours each day, the woman was no longer confined to a hospice bed. She was 17 again, and Melody went there with her. When the Grim Reaper appeared at the foot of the bed one evening, Melody recognized him immediately. Decades had passed since she had seen him. He had not changed. The hood remained drawn over the darkness where a face should have been. His hands were black beneath the sleeves of his robe, without bone or flesh visible upon them. The long handle of his scythe rested against one hand, its curved blade catching a trace of light from the bedside lamp. Melody looked at him. Then she looked at the woman. She understood. The woman was awake. "Would you sit with me?" Melody pulled the chair closer. "Of course." "Until I sleep." "Until you don't need me anymore." The woman's hand found hers. Her breathing slowed. The Grim Reaper waited. Melody felt the fingers in her hand relax. The pain left the woman's face. A moment later, the Grim Reaper was no longer alone at the foot of the bed. The old woman stood beside him. Except, she was not old anymore. Melody caught only a glimpse before they were gone. For an instant, she thought she saw a 17-year-old girl. There were many beds after that. Melody stopped counting them. She remembered the people instead. One man had no family anyone could find. He had lived alone for almost 30 years and insisted he preferred it that way. He did not like being fussed over. The first time Melody tucked a blanket around him, he pulled it loose. "I can do that." The second time, he did the same. By the third week, he let her. He had spent most of his life repairing farm machinery. His hands were thick through the knuckles, even after illness had taken much of the strength from them. He told Melody about engines. At first she understood almost nothing. He explained anyway. Soon she knew which tractor he had owned when he was young, and why a certain old transmission had been better than the ones that came later. One afternoon, he asked Melody whether she wanted to know the truth. She waited. "I hated living alone." It was the first time he had said it. Melody looked at him. He stared toward the window. "I just got used to telling people I didn't." She reached over and adjusted the blanket. This time, he did not pull it away. The Grim Reaper came several nights later. Melody was there. She had stayed beyond the end of her shift because the man's breathing had changed. There was no family to call. No one was coming. So she remained in the chair. The room grew darker as evening passed. When the Grim Reaper appeared, Melody glanced toward him. "I know," she whispered. The man stirred. His eyes opened. "Still here. Still here." He closed his eyes again. Melody stayed until his breathing stopped. She did not let go of his hand until the Grim Reaper had taken him. There were patients who had families. Sometimes that made things easier. Sometimes it didn't. One woman had children who wanted to visit every day. She would not allow it. She told them she was tired. She said the visits were too much. She insisted that everyone had jobs and children of their own. When Melody came into the room, the woman asked her to close the door. "They shouldn't have to see me like this." Melody sat down. The woman looked toward the window. "I was their mother." "You still are." "Then I should protect them." Melody thought of a bedroom from her childhood. She remembered a weak hand searching across a blanket until it found hers. "Maybe coming here is something they need to do for you." The woman looked at her. "And maybe it's something they need to do for themselves." The next day, the door remained open. Her family came. Melody stayed only long enough to make sure the woman was comfortable. Then she stepped into the hallway. She heard laughter from inside the room. Later, there was crying. After a while, laughter returned. When Melody checked again, photographs covered the blanket. The woman was pointing at one of them while her family crowded around the bed. Melody quietly closed the door part way. That moment belonged to them. The Grim Reaper did not come that day. He came 2 mornings later. By then, the family had returned. Melody saw him standing beyond them. No one else noticed. She moved among the people around the bed, showing one of them how to dampen the woman's lips. She explained that the pauses between breaths might become longer. Someone asked how much time was left. "I don't know," Melody said. It was a question she never pretended she could answer. But when she looked toward the Grim Reaper, she knew it would not be long. The family gathered closer. One person leaned down and whispered into the woman's ear. Another rested a hand against her shoulder. The woman did not open her eyes. Melody knew she could still hear them. "Keep talking to her," she said softly. So they did. They told her they loved her. They told her she could rest. The Grim Reaper waited until they were finished. When the final breath came, there was no panic. There were tears. Melody stood nearby while the family held one another. Beyond them, the woman rose free of the bed. The Grim Reaper turned with her. Melody watched them disappear. Years passed. Melody's hair began to show strands of gray. Her hands became more practiced. She could change bedding beneath a sleeping patient without fully waking them. She knew how to recognize discomfort in someone who could no longer explain what hurt. But she never allowed experience to make the work ordinary. Every bed belonged to someone. Every room held a life much larger than the illness that had brought them there. She listened. A former teacher told her about the student who had written to her 20 years after leaving school. A widower described the afternoon he first saw the woman he would marry. A woman who had spent most of her life cleaning other people's houses confessed that she had always wanted to see the ocean. Melody listened to all of them. She began to understand that people approaching death often reached backward. They returned to childhood. They remembered first loves. They spoke about mistakes they had carried for years. Sometimes they asked whether they had been good people. Melody never tried to judge an entire life from a hospice room. Instead, she asked questions. What happened after that? Did you ever tell him? What was she like? And the room would change. The walls seemed to fall away as someone who could barely lift a cup took Melody into a dance hall from 50 years earlier. Another brought her into a kitchen where bread had been baked every Sunday. Melody went wherever they took her. She laughed when they laughed. When the stories became difficult, she did not hurry them toward happier ones. People had spent their lives being interrupted. Melody would not interrupt them at the end. The Grim Reaper came often. Sometimes Melody saw him in the hallway before she entered a room. Sometimes he appeared in a corner, while a family slept in chairs beside the bed. Once she saw him standing outside a doorway while a patient argued with his son. The son had not visited in years. Melody did not know what had happened between them. She heard anger. Then silence. She started toward the room. The Grim Reaper remained where he was. Melody stopped. Inside, the son began to cry. The older man said something too softly for Melody to hear. A chair scraped across the floor. Then there was quiet again. The Grim Reaper looked toward Melody. She understood. She walked away. The man was still alive the next morning. His son was asleep beside him, his head resting against the mattress. The Grim Reaper was gone. There were other times when he came, because the suffering had become too great. Those were the times Melody understood him best. A patient might have spent days slipping farther from the room, no longer able to speak. Melody would wash the person's face. She would change the sheets. She would sit nearby and speak softly, even when there was no answer. Then she would notice the dark figure standing beside the bed. She never thought of him as something terrible. She had seen what came before him, the pain, the body working harder for every breath, the families begging for one more day and hating themselves for wanting it when the person they loved was suffering. The Grim Reaper did not cause any of it. He came when it was time for the suffering to stop. Melody had understood that when she was a child. She understood it better now. One winter, a young woman arrived in hospice. She was younger than Melody. That bothered Melody more than she wanted to admit. There were no visitors. At first, Melody assumed the family lived far away. Then the woman explained. She had left home years earlier after an argument with her parents. Pride had stretched the separation from months into years. Now she was dying. "Do they know?" Melody asked. The woman shook her head. "I don't want them coming because they feel guilty." "What if they come because they love you?" The woman turned away. Melody did not press. The next day, she asked whether Melody thought people could wait too long to fix something. "Sometimes." The answer seemed to surprise her. Melody pulled the chair closer. "But if you're asking whether today is too late, you're still here." The woman stared at the telephone for a long time. Then she asked Melody to bring it closer. Melody left the room while she made the call. She never asked what was said. 2 days later, people arrived carrying an overnight bag. Melody saw the young woman break down before they had fully crossed the room. She left them alone. The Grim Reaper came the following week. He stood near the window. Melody recognized the way the young woman's breathing had changed. Her parents sat beside the bed. One of them had fallen asleep, holding her hand. Melody checked her patient and quietly pulled the blanket higher. Before she left, the woman's eyes opened. She looked at Melody. "Thank you." Melody smiled. She knew the words were not for the blanket. "Get some rest." The woman's eyes closed. Melody looked at the Grim Reaper. Then she left the room. This time, she was not needed at the bedside. Someone else was there. That mattered too. People often asked Melody how she could do the work. They said it must be depressing. They wondered how she could watch people die over and over again. Melody never knew how to explain that dying was only part of what she saw. She saw an estranged son return. She watched an old man admit that he had been lonely. She listened to a woman become 17 again while remembering a boy she had loved. She saw people who had spent their lives rushing finally become still enough to talk about where they had been. There was sadness in hospice. There was also life. So much life. It arrived in stories. Late one evening, Melody sat beside another patient who had no family. The woman had been sleeping most of the day. When she woke, she seemed confused. "Is anyone here?" "I'm here." The woman turned toward Melody. "No, I mean—" Her eyes moved toward the corner of the room. Melody followed them. The Grim Reaper stood there. His hood concealed the emptiness beneath it. His scythe rested at his side. Melody looked back at the woman. "You're not alone." The woman stared toward the corner. "Do you see him?" Melody had never been asked that before. She could have lied. Instead, she nodded. The woman's fingers tightened around hers. "Should I be afraid?" Melody remembered being a little girl. She remembered the lamp beside her mother's bed. She remembered the figure who had waited without rushing her. "No." The woman's grip loosened slightly. Melody moved her chair closer. "When I was little, my mother was very sick." The woman listened. Melody rarely spoke about her own life with patients. Their time belonged to them. Tonight felt different. "I saw him when she died." The woman's eyes returned to the Grim Reaper. "What happened?" "She stopped hurting." The woman was quiet. "That's all I want." "I know. Will you stay?" Melody smiled. "Yes." She stayed. The hours passed slowly. The woman drifted in and out of sleep. Once she woke and told Melody about a dog she had owned as a child. Later she remembered a summer when she had worked at a roadside diner. Near dawn, her words stopped. Melody held her hand. The Grim Reaper came closer. The woman opened her eyes once more. She did not look at Melody this time. She looked at him, and she smiled. Her final breath left quietly. Melody felt the hand in hers become still. Then the woman stood beside the bed. She looked at Melody. For a moment, Melody saw what she had seen so many times before. No illness, no exhaustion. Only the person who had been there all along. The Grim Reaper waited. The woman went to him. Before they disappeared, he turned his hood toward Melody. She wondered whether he remembered her. The little girl beside another bed. The child who had held her mother's hand while he waited. Of course he did. Melody worked in hospice for many years. There were always more rooms, more beds, more people with stories waiting for someone willing to hear them. She never stopped listening. She learned that some patients wanted to talk about dying, while others wanted to talk about everything except it. She respected both. When someone wanted silence, she sat quietly. When someone wanted to remember, She listened. When someone had no one left, Melody made certain there was a chair beside the bed. She could not replace a husband who had died 20 years earlier. She could not become the child who never came home. She could not give anyone more time. That was never what she had promised. She could be there. Sometimes, at the end of a shift, Melody walked through the quiet halls and thought about her mother. She understood now what the little girl beside that bed had been trying to do. She had wanted to help. She had not known how to stop the illness. She could not make her mother breathe easier, so she had stayed. That had been the beginning. Not the illness, not even the loss, the staying. Years later, Melody sat beside another bed as afternoon light reached across the floor. An old man was telling her about the house he had built when he was young. He had told the story before. Melody remembered. She did not tell him. She listened as though it were the first time. Across the room, the Grim Reaper appeared. Melody saw him. She gave the smallest nod. Then she turned back to the man. He had reached the part about choosing the windows. Melody leaned closer. And what could you see from them? The man's tired face changed. He smiled. Then he began to tell her. The Grim Reaper waited. So did Melody. The end.